Very good morning to all who are watching this recording, and many thanks to the IGAR's conference organizers for making this a very seamless experience for all of us. Before I start, I would like to request everyone who's watching the recorded version of the video to pause the video for a short while and participate on this online survey using either this QR code or the short bit.ly link. It'll only take 2 minutes and we will be really grateful for your inputs. My presentation today is a result of 3 key observations I've made during the course of my interactions with AI for EO scientists over the last year. My first observation relates to the understanding or perception of the term ethics and the role of ethics as a discipline. I find that the most common understanding is that ethics aims to tell scientists what not to do. Example, don't lie, don't violate privacy. It is sometimes a rather feared discipline. Scientists are afraid that ethicists are out to declare whole academic papers or fields of research as unethical per se. However, this is not the only role of ethics as a discipline. Ethics as a discipline also aims at pointing out the positive. What should or ought we aspire to, and what can we do more constructively? We can then understand these 2 aspects of ethics as a discipline as helping identify ethical issues on the one hand and ethical opportunities on the other. We can understand this better with a concrete example. Consider the field of slum identification. A senior scientist who I interacted with was quick to identify the ethical issue of stigmatization linked to labeling of areas as a slum. The question is then, should we stop this line of research altogether? Ethics as a discipline would then ask, is positive labeling possible? Can we label the area that is currently labeled as a slum as an area that needs more governmental attention? Example, vis-a-vis reduction of building density, increase in green spaces, or better management of garbage accumulation. Such labeling would support concrete and positive governmental intervention while avoiding the stigmatizing label of slum. We also see this balance between should and should not as we browse through the foundational values of ethics depicted here. With the exception of the emerging top ethical issue of privacy, the foundational values of ethics are all positive in connotation and aim: honesty, integrity, fairness, responsibility, and even the latest emerging issue of sustainability. Further, even the subcategories of ethics that have evolved under various AI ethics guidelines comprise of a combination of do's and don'ts. This, however, brings me to my second observation. While a majority of scientists I surveyed claimed to have read various ethics guidelines, such as the AI ethics guidelines for trustworthy AI or other relevant AI ethics guidelines, the vast majority also said that they did not find these guidelines to be practically useful for their daily work. That is, these guidelines are neither able to help researchers identify ethical issues nor ethical opportunities in their current fields of research. My third observation is closely linked to the first 2, that scientists who consider themselves as working in fundamental research and engineering research are less likely to be aware of ethical issues relevant to their work. In a rather telling moment, I even had a mid-level scientist declare that taking care of ethics is not my job. In many instances, scientists were also unaware of ethical opportunities offered by their fields of research. Nevertheless, there is understandably a broad consensus that it would be useful to be aware of ethical values and issues already in very early stages of research. In fact, as we become more mindful of ethics in our daily research, we notice that the number of ethical values and issues to be borne in mind increase as we move from fundamental or application agnostic research to research involving application of these findings and real-world uses of the research. Accordingly, over the past year, I've been working with several scientists to co-develop a novel approach for identifying ethical issues and opportunities in early stages of AI for EO research. In order to meaningfully share my findings so far, it is useful to look at the most prominent Western approaches in ethics. These are, first, the duties-based approach, also known as the deontological approach, which asks the questions such as, what are my duties? Am I doing my duty? The second is the consequentialist approach that asks questions like, what are the likely consequences of my action or of my research? And there is, of course, a third approach in Western sciences that is a combination of these two approaches. But here's the problem. When dealing with research in emerging technologies such as AI for EO, it is difficult to fully know what the consequences of natural technological evolution are likely to be. In fact, it may even be difficult to understand what one's concrete duties are outside a very abstract set of values such as honesty and integrity. Interestingly, in Eastern philosophical thought, ethical action is not determined only on the basis of duties and consequences, but is rather based on a complex interplay between what is known as karma and dharma. The term karma, which is commonly understood in the West as consequences of an action, actually represents present action, the inevitable consequences of the action, as well as causes and intentions that led to the action in the first place. Accordingly, actions or inactions are classified as ethical or unethical based on a combination of three things, namely the intention, desire, or will underlying the action, the dharma or duty of the person, and the inevitable or expected consequences of the action. However, we see here again that we are faced with the problem that at least two of the three determinants of ethical conduct are entirely unclear in research linked to emerging technologies. While battling with this question, I chanced upon a series of talks by renowned international humanitarian Sri Ravi Shankar. The talk was titled Our Three Powers and went into a fascinating interpretation of an ancient Eastern mythological figure named Muruga, also popularly known by the name Skanda. Skanda, also known as Vaituo in Chinese and Tibetan philosophy, is popularly known as the Lord of War or the protector of Dharma. In Chinese and Tibetan philosophy, Vaituo is a bodhisattva who protects teachings of Buddha and is also considered a protector of Mao Shan, the goddess of mercy and compassion. In India, when we look more closely at artistic depictions of Skanda in South Indian paintings and sculptures, we see Skanda is depicted together with two goddesses who he is supposedly married to, namely Valli, the one in green, and Devasena. This trinity of gods and goddesses is a symbol where Valli represents human desire or intentions, Skanda represents right knowledge and human values, and Devasena represents action. Skanda's imagery vividly describes the link between these three powers. Knowledge and human values are meaningless if they are unaccompanied by appropriate will, that is the desire to act, and actual constructive action. Similarly, will and action must be guided by right knowledge and human values for long-term benefits for oneself and society. While the consequences of our action, as well as the concrete duties, may be unknown or unclear in the context of research in emerging technologies, the imagery of Skanda reminds us of our three powers. Powers that human beings have more immediate control over. These powers are the power of will or intention, the power to act or not act on an intention, and the power to acquire the right knowledge so that appropriate values guide our intentions and actions. The knowledge here, in a practical sense, can include scientific knowledge, as well as knowledge of fundamental human values, human rights, and sustainability goals, such as those contained in the UN SDGs. Once these three are roughly identified, research can follow an iterative 5-step process through their research life cycle to identify ethical issues and opportunities, starting with identifying their concrete will or intention. Less abstract these are, the better, the more concrete in terms of real world application. Second, does the intention align with your duties and your conscience? Do they align with the objective understanding of fundamental rights and values? Third, to identify and categorize the specific action taken as part of the research. Fourth, ensure that every action is aligned with and aimed at accomplishing the expressed intentions. And finally, check that each action is in harmony with universally acceptable human values. We can also develop additional action categories under which ethical issues can be identified. And for example, data lifecycle stages and ethical issues within each lifecycle stage. As this research continues, I'm happy to interact with scientists who are interested in contributing to the creation of these research relevant action categories. I therefore invite you once again to contribute to this research by first filling out this survey. And in conclusion to this preliminary research presentation, I would like to say that as we march towards a high-tech future where AI and EO data will be used for a large number of existing research endeavors, it is necessary for each research institution to create a culture of ethically mindful research. Ethics researchers working in isolation or in exclusive silos cannot create such a culture. It is necessary for AI for EO scientists to work much more closely with ethics researchers in a diversity of research projects. This would help AI for EO scientists become more aware of how to conduct ethically mindful research, and would help ethics researchers such as myself develop more practically useful tools and approaches for the identification of ethical issues and opportunities in early stages of AI for EO research. I thank you for your attention and look forward to answering your questions.